Hello, welcome. We are going to be diving in and rooting into a beautiful experience today with the ReWild exhibit. This is Jeanne Simmons' art exhibit we're going to be looking at today and talking about today. So I want to welcome you. I am Laura Hollick. I'm the founder of Soul Art Studio, an artist and the curator for this show. And when I first saw Jeanne's work, I was so deeply moved. I was so touched that I actually reached out to her right away. And I was like, oh, I'd love to talk with you. And I think that was over a year or so ago, maybe even 2 years ago. And, there's just so much richness in this work. And so I invited Jeanne to do an exhibit for our soul art community. And in the soul art community, we're looking at how to connect with our soul, how to express ourselves, how to be our natural self. How to be ourselves and thrive in this world and create and, discover the uniqueness of ourselves. And connecting with nature is such a powerful way to remember our own true nature. Remember our connection with our soul, remember our connection with our essence, and having that sense of non-judgment to bring it through. So this work that we're going to be looking at today feels so important as a process of rewilding ourselves, a process of remembering, getting that spark of our true nature, and feeling the power of nature and how it can really call us home to ourselves, but also the respect on this planet. So I'd like to welcome all of you from all over the world, everyone who's tuning in. This is fantastic. And I'd like to bring on Jeanne Simmons, the earth artist who has created this ReWild exhibit. Hello, welcome, Jeanne.
Hello, hi, Laura. Hello, everybody. Such a pleasure to be here.
So Jeanne, how did this work begin for you? We're going to be seeing some of your pieces, but just to kind of get a sense, who were you before this body of work started, and what sparked you to create this work?
Yeah, well, interesting question. My journey as an artist began long ago, and I went to art school in the late 80s, early 90s as a sculpture major. So my focus was making objects, and my approach to that was I always dug deep. I guess that's just my nature. So I was often trying to unearth material from my inner world. So that was that process, and it was very beautiful. Then I became a mom and got very involved in being a mother and having children, and sort of stepped away from the fine art world and just focused on being a creative human. And then in 2015, as my kids were getting older, I was driving down the road with my family past one of my favorite fields. And I had one of those aha moments. And long before that, in 91, I had this experience at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in a field of very tall grass, and discovered that I could braid that grass. But I didn't really come up with a project for it. But it was just kind of living in the back of my mind for all those many years. So finally in 2015, I saw this field and I thought, oh, that's where I can do this project. And so I braided this big spiral in the field. And after that, things just started kind of flooding my imagination. And, the spiral was kind of a fun project, but I didn't feel it was a successful art piece necessarily, but it did really get the ball rolling. And I started having visions of things, in particular visions of, women woven into the grass. And I thought, this is crazy. What is this thing? I've never seen anything like this before. But that vision kind of wouldn't leave me. It just kept coming back. So finally, in 2018, I invited a good friend of mine to do that project with me, and doubted it the entire way. I was doubting it even as I drove out to the field that morning, and just thought, this is crazy. I don't know what I'm doing, but I did it anyway, and that piece changed my life.
Yeah, and me too, I have to say, when I saw it. So I want to show 3 pieces of these braiding. We're going to see more, but I want to show these first three to give that visual of what you just shared. And, you see a field, you get ideas, and then you're like, oh, I'm braiding and I can try this. And to see these pieces, what came out of it. So there's three that we'll start with. It's so exquisite. It's so exquisite. And so just need to take it in. When I first saw that piece, and I know that the one with the braiding and the hair in the was like a viral, explosion on the internet. That piece, totally. And I felt the transmission of it too. Like when I first saw it, I was like, whoa, like something about it just said so much. There's without any words. I'm very curious for you, what does it say to you? What, like, there's thousands of people who have been so touched by this piece. What does it say to you?
With this project, I was really trying to just connect my model in as many ways as I could to the earth and just tether her there. And she's a very special woman. She's a naturalist. She's just very comfortable in the natural world. And she had a very profound experience during the making of this piece. And it shows, it's reflected in her face. She had like a deeply healing experience when we made this. And I think it might be that the essence of that is what people responded to. And what I love about this piece is that it shows us how comfortable it is possible to be when you are connected to the natural world. And I feel we're living in a time when there's this disconnect, almost a divorce, and so many of us aren't having these experiences. And here's a woman who's in a state of the deepest rest possible, and she's having it because she's in contact with the natural world, not in spite of the fact that she's but because she's there. And I think that moves me today, and I think that's what really maybe moved a lot of people.
Yeah, and just that sense of being part of, being held, being held, like in that cocoon one, it's just like being held, supported, connected, being part of nature.
Yes.
And it's interesting you use the word, like, now it's almost like being divorced from nature, just the way that society and civilization is set up. It does create that separation where it's like, even, we go to a place in nature to like go look at trees rather than that being maybe more of just like how we live.
Right.
And so, I know that part of your own personal mission is a lot about rewilding and reconnecting with nature and building that relationship. What do you see happening on the planet right now? Like what's your perspective on what's going on?
Yeah. I think that there are forces that have brought us to this very precarious sort of environmental tipping point that we've arrived at now. And, Bell Hooks uses the term white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. I prefer white supremacist capitalist heteropatriarchy. And so we see a lot of scary things out there. And I'm overwhelmed by it. And I think that's where this work came from. My overwhelm, my fear, my anxiety about climate change, my concern for my children, for their futures on this planet. And so, yeah, I mean, it doesn't look good. And I think we're all coping with that in one way or another, and whether we're conscious of it or not. but we see a lot of people struggling, so many people struggling, and a lot of people going on medication just to get through the day or the week. So I think it's a challenging time, and I think a lot of that challenge has to come from this destructive kind of tendency. And my work for me is about acting as an antidote or a counterbalance to that imbalance. And it's helped me. It's helped me cope and survive with a lot of hardship, a lot of personal hardship, and just the hardship that I see out there in the world. And so that's something that saved me, and my time in nature is what guided me to doing this work. I have 3 dogs. We're a dog family, so I'm out there every day with them, and really it was through that, kind of having adventures with them, that my bond with the natural world just deepened and deepened. And I think I got to this place of feeling so much love, for the world around me. And that, I think that love happens when you develop an intimacy, when you start, my brother who's a surfer, reading the waves, reading the water, reading the sky, that's his way of having that connection. And for me, being out there in my favorite fields or woods or beaches with my dogs, and noticing when certain plants die back, and when they reappear in the spring, and what's that timing, and where's the sun at a certain time of day in this field. And that intimacy made me feel like my relationship with the natural world was alive. And what I was feeling was love.
Mm.
And when we feel love, when we really feel love, we want and need to express it somehow. And that's what my work is. My work for me is expression of my profound love and reverence for the natural world. And yeah.
Mm. I'm seeing some comments coming through. Layla says, so different and beautiful. Tabitha says, absolutely stunning. Jenny, this is total connection to earth. Dana says, beautiful, such peace. And Lainey says, these images are so beautiful and profound. Thank you for bringing us this incredible work. Yeah, it's so amazing. So many things in that. One of the things that you mentioned in the beginning there is this idea about, patriarchy, and, that just a certain kind of structure of society that we've been living in. And one of the things that I noticed in your work through a couple of the pieces that I saw was just how there was such a feminine approach. So I want to share a couple of the pictures in the exhibit that really kind of bring forward this feminine aspect. And there's some yonis, of course, that we're going to see, and also a woman in a landscape. So I'm curious, Jeanne, your thoughts on the feminine and the masculine, the patriarchy, nature. Do you perceive nature as feminine? Anything that you'd like to say about this idea of the feminine energy on the planet?
Yeah, I do think that, I think Carl Jung talks about this idea, this concept of the masculine and the feminine being complementary, and that if they're in balance, if they are in balance, there's a wholeness there, a completeness, and sort of a healthy functioning energy, or what have you. And what we're seeing for me is an imbalance. And so making this work is a way for me to reassert the feminine. But it also goes a little bit beyond that for me. And it has to do with women depicting women in a way in a relationship with the natural world, and and um, and that those women are taking the place of all of humanity, not just women, not just the feminine. I would like these women to depict a relationship with the natural world and for all of humanity. We're used to seeing a man hold that place, one man represent humanity. We're not really used to seeing a woman serving in that role. And so, it is the feminine for sure. And those yoni pieces were inspired by a woman who was part of the Black Lives Matters protests in Portland, and you may have seen her in the news. She was called, her name, all we know is that her name is Jeanne. But she showed up at a rally completely naked and stood in front of a row of heavily armed police officers with shields and dressed in black and guns. And she stood in front of the row of them naked and sat on the ground and kind of did these yoga postures and exposed herself. And it really got me thinking. And I was very fascinated by her statement and by her gesture. And I started studying other depictions of yonis throughout history and in art and in architecture. And I just thought, I wonder if I could, using my tools and using my materials and my way of making things, I wonder if I could do justice to a yoni in nature. And so that's where those two pieces came from. And again, yeah, it was just about how do I present a counterbalance to all of these all of this patriarchy, all of these kind of destructive forces that we're seeing playing out in front of us. How do I reset it for myself, you know? And if it resonates with other people, then great. And I think it has to a certain extent. I mean, I get a lot of different kinds of feedback, but the bottom line is I'm resetting my own internal sort of framework for understanding the universe, creating my own epistemology, really. And so the yonis were sort of a way of trying to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is the process of rewilding, right? It kind of like reorienting, like reestablishing, like where is the root? And so in the woman's body, the root, the yoni, but also it's how we come onto the planet, right? Like it's like
Yes.
male or female, it's like how everybody comes here.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a C-section, but energetically, it's like that's the passageway through. And
Mm.
so yeah, it's incredible. And then what you were sharing about like your process of kind of finding, I guess maybe it's peace or just like how to deal with what we're living in. Because even though, it's normal what we're living in, normal because it's what we experience, but it's not necessarily normal to our true nature. And so there's like a dis-ease to, kind of coping with different things and kind of finding our way with it. And I think a lot of that is because as women, we have been unrooted from that connection to like our own root, our own connection, basically. So there's so many more pieces that I want to share. We're going to try and get through a bunch, but also just to let everyone know that all the pieces of the exhibit are featured on a whole page that you'll be able to see all of them together. So we're going to be going through as many as we can and talking about them. But then also just knowing if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I want to see that more, there's a chance that you'll be able to see it more with the whole show. All right, so I want to share some of the pieces that are really about dressing women, basically, and using nature as the adornment, using the natural world as, what is the clothing, what is being worn. So we'll go through, and I know there's like silence as we're watching them, just as a chance to take it in. Mm, so beautiful. Sally says, with love to Jeanne from the Chinese gardens. Thank you for touching my soul. Tuliki says, this is so inspiring. Oh, and Tuliki, you're another earth artist out there in Finland. Melissa says, such a gorgeous way to incorporate the divine feminine into our culture. Thank you, Jeanne. Lainey, yes, adore the yoni medicine pieces. Oh my goodness. Yes, 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 yes. Brittany says, reclamation. Thank you. So beautiful. Yeah, I find with this work, it kind of brings me into earth speed. Sort of, our society is such a fast pace. There's so much going on. There's all these things. And, and that's cool too in its own way for sure. But there's like an earth speed where we kind of just drop in and time shifts. And when I look at these pieces, I feel my body kind of come down and just sort of go into a bit of that earth speed. And I'm remembering what you said in the beginning, like this intimate relationship that you've developed with nature. And I'm curious, what could you say to someone maybe looking at this, or, how can we develop a deeper connection with the natural world in the reality of this, the way things are? How can we build that intimate relationship?
Yeah, well, I think like any relationship, it's about spending time. We have to cultivate it. We have to get to know it. Just like if we're having a relationship with another human, you have to invest that time. You have to be curious. You have to get to know that entity, that person. And so for me, that's really where this work came from, was the hours and hours that I was spending out there with my dogs, responding to my environment. And I do think I think it can be challenging, living in this city. I was just in the city in Seattle the other day for an appointment, and I was incredibly overwhelmed because I'm very out of my element there. And I was waiting on the side of the road, waiting to meet somebody, and there were cars going by. It was very intense. But there was this tree in front of me, this fabulous tree. And I just took it in, and it was thriving. And I just thought, wow, if this tree can thrive here, maybe I can too. But also I just felt like, okay, I have something to hold on to. So I do really think that if people can find their own special places in nature, in the natural world, and spend time there and really get to know those places, I strongly believe that they will experience some kind of connection, some kind of healing. They'll be stronger afterward, for spending that time there. I think even in the city you can do that, or in your backyard, in the park. Find your special spot and take it all in. Breathe it in. Use all your senses. Smell the smells. Taste the things that you can taste. Listen to the birds. Notice the critters. Feel the dirt. Sit down on the ground if you can. Make yourself comfortable there. And I just think that is a very, very powerful way to connect with the world and with ourselves in the world, and to rewild and rehome, like you've been saying. Be part of it, let it in. I think that's, for me, what it's all about. Um, and I've healed myself there. That's how I heal. That's how I tend to myself. You know. And for me, it is a practice, much like, a meditation practice or a yoga practice. It's my practice. So I go every day. And, and so, and when I go there, I often try to inhabit sort of the wordless parts of myself. My dogs are sort of my role models. They're kind of showing me, how do you behave out there in the world, aside from this kind of prefrontal cortex, or whatever it is that thinking part of us that's so word oriented. I try and just go and notice what's around me and respond to it, and that's just become the most beautiful part of my life. And that is where I find my inspiration, and my
Mm-hmm.
ideas.
Mm-hmm.
When you read about the creative process, and I love reading about and talking about the creative process. And there are some brilliant books out there. Rick Rubin has a new book, The Creative Act, it's called. Um, and of course, Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic, and they talk about ideas and how ideas are just out there and inspiration is just out there. And and if we're lucky enough to have one of these ideas or inspiration kind of land on us, and then we nurture it and we develop it and we create something from it, then that's how we access these projects. That's where this artwork can come from. And so for me, it's like I have to put myself in the way of those ideas, in the way of that inspiration. And so when I go out there, that's where it comes from. The materials I see imply certain things. I mean, you were just showing those images with the dresses, and it's kind of been a surprise to me, actually. But when I see certain materials, they just imply clothing. I don't know. So nature as fashion. I don't know. Fashion is art, So, but I think the intention for me is always placing that woman in the landscape and rooting her in the landscape through these materials. So merging her. But because I'm a sculptor, I feel compelled to organize those materials in some way. So I use weaving or braiding or whatever. I want to do something to those. I want to transform those materials and make them look like something sculptural and beautiful. So I found my way to kind of clothing these models with these materials and rooting them into the landscape, and hopefully elevating them, the materials, and that spot where they are, all at the same time. So I think that's what I enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm. I was in Toronto recently, and it's a busy city, and I was feeling the stress, right, of just like, I'm also someone who spends a lot of time in nature, and just that kind of bustle of it all, the sort of the speed of it. And I was sort of like gripping, kind of gripping as I'm going down the street, just trying to cope. And as I was going down, I saw this dragonfly zip across this very busy street. And so I just followed it. And as I was following it, I felt my body kind of like open a little bit. And I think that what happens in nature is there's like the safety to open. It's like you can kind of like let yourself be. And in that openness, those inspired ideas can come through. Because you're not like clenching and resisting it. You're not like blocking it and just trying to like cope with it all. It's like the guard can come down.
Right.
And so I do love that practice of being in nature. I feel like I also need to be in nature every day. And if I'm not, I'm like antsy. I feel like I've gotten a little bit too much electricity is going in the system without it being able to ground out. And then also feeling that clench of like, just sort of blocked up. Whereas there's such the ability to open, I find, in nature. The safety, there's no judgment. You can feel miserable. You can feel miserable and it's all okay. And it's like, but it's somehow beautiful. You can let yourself flow with all your thoughts and feelings to the point of just like relaxed openness. And so, when we don't have that in our everyday life, we get so wound up, so kind of bunged up. And so rewilding, I think, is like, it's partly a decompression, coming back to that state of being where it's like you actually can receive inspiration. You can feel like you're connected. It's safe to relax into that connectivity. And one of the things of the life cycle is that there's also the death cycle, right? It's like whenever I'm out in nature, there's usually, at least a dozen trees that have fallen over that I see. And there's whole, like communities of fungus growing on that. Or, sometimes I'll see some skulls from different animals.
Right.
and things like that. And so there's a couple of the pieces that you've done that are, they imply to me the death cycle. So I want to
Mm.
share two of the pieces that are included in the exhibit, that Phoenix from the Flame. Yeah. So this piece is called Phoenix from the Flame for
Mhm.
Sinead, and I believe
Mhm.
you're implying to Sinead O'Connor. Can
Yes.
you tell
Yes.
us a little bit about this?
Yeah. I mean, it's personal and it's heavy. So just to let people know, but um, yeah, my family and I suffered a terrible loss um, 2 years ago, um, when I lost my son, who was 23. And so, um, as you could try to imagine, it's been incredibly challenging. And this piece is a metaphor for the experience that I had, or that I noticed that I was having after that loss. So we lost Corbin, and everything went dark, and I remember thinking, that I felt like a pile of ash. I just felt like a pile of ashes, that my life was a pile of ash, that it could just be blown away if a big wind came. Um, and after a little while, I became aware that there was still a little ember burning in that pile of ash, and that I needed to nurture that ember. I needed to keep that going. So I wanted to make an art piece that was descriptive of that process. And so this is what happened. So I set about, someone left some quarter rounds of cedar at our studio, and I got a shake fro, and I cut the cedar into these shakes like shingles, and then I charred them with a propane torch, and sort of built this sarcophagus. And I forged a little tray to build a fire on the chest of my model. Um, Now, mind you, my model, Katrina, who's the same amazing woman who modeled the seaweed piece, the kelp piece called Katrina, she had long hair, as far as I knew. And the original intention was I was going to separate her hair into sections and weight the ends of those sections down with stones at the beach. Um, but then I called her, I told her about the piece, and she said, "Oh, by the way, I shaved my head." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, I'll invent something else." So I invented this sort of halo around her head. And then very shortly after that, I got the news that Sinead O'Connor had died. And I was, very moved by Sinead O'Connor's work. And she's kind of a hero of mine. So, and probably a lot of you know that Sinead O'Connor also lost a son in 2022. And
Mhm.
I think that I wondered if perhaps she did not succeed in keeping her ember burning. And I decided to dedicate the piece to her. And then the fact that Katrina had shaved her head seemed very appropriate relative to this new direction that the piece was going, because, of course, Sinead O'Connor famously had a very shaved head. So, Phoenix from the Flame is a lyric from one of Sinead O'Connor's songs.
That's
And
right.
yeah, and I think this piece for me it's a heavy one, it's like she's not moving, she's encased, my model is shrouded in this charred cedar sarcophagus. It's heavy, but there's still a fire burning. And there's a defiance in her eyes for me. I see, and I asked her to look at me defiantly, look at me like, no, I'm not going down in flames. I'm going to survive this. And so that's where that piece came from. It was a beautiful ritual. My model Katrina has also, like many of us, had traumatic loss, and so and she was in that sarcophagus for 3 hours. Amazingly enough, I don't think many people could just kind of lie there very still. But she's a butoh, she's a dancer. She does butoh, but also her own. She's invented her own kind of genre of dance, and she has that ability, like Nicole in my grass cocoon piece, to just get very centered and very in this kind of meditative state when we're working together. So it was like this grief ritual. When I was building this around her, we were processing our losses together, and it was a very profound moment for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that came from.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And so there's a bunch of things I'd love to speak to on all of that. First, with your son, obviously, that is, and yes, Sinead also experienced that, the loss of her son. And I think that there's, what do I want to say with that? There's so much in that. I think that's one of the things that nature does give to us, is that permission to feel what we feel and do the whole cycle, like whether it's grief and, all the things in that. And I think art that has transmission, like art that has that sense that it touches deeply, it somehow has access to the whole cycle. Meaning the pain and the joy, the depth and the surface, like it somehow, because it kind of like it goes through the layers within ourselves, and it reaches. And someone like Sinead O'Connor, her first album I think came out in like late 80s, early 90s, and I still listen to that today. Because it's beyond, it's timeless. Like it's something, when something touches deeply, like grief, a loss, a joy, all these things, that it's so deep, like that, like our soul has been shook in some way by it, touched in some way. It's beyond time, right? And it's in a different zone altogether. And I think that as humans, like we're sort of like trying to deal with all these things, and yet there's moments where we kind of tap into that timelessness, beyond the pain, in a way, not to escape it, but like somehow we like have moved through it because we experienced it. We experience, it doesn't go away, but it's like we've reached something through it. And in Sinead's music, I definitely get that sense. Like you can feel her pain, but also the angelic ecstasy of her passion that comes through in her songs. And in your work as well, there's this transmission that comes through where I feel this sense of like, I can kind of, just like surrender into trusting the process, right? Like trusting what is happening. And I'd love to speak with you about the process itself. Like there's the creative impulse, the desire to do something. You mentioned that you like to like organize the things, like you like being in nature, and then you want to like weave it, braid it, put it together in some way, organize it. There's an impulse, there's an instinct, there's a process. I want to share a couple of the images of your creative process. Okay. And just speak a little bit about, we'll look at them. And so we get to see the context of you in nature and doing these pieces that we've been looking at. Yeah, just let it absorb. It's wonderful. So there's that one that we were just looking at, the phoenix from the flame, where you're kind of charring these pieces. when you're working on something like that and there's so much significance for yourself in what that's really about,
Mm-hmm.
as you're working on it, is that present to you, or is it like, does it literally feel like a way of processing grief, or is it like you just now you've set out this project and you're into it? How does the process work with you, I guess, is my thought or question with that.
Um, I think of course it starts with a vision, right? An idea. Sometimes that vision evolves over time and changes, and the end product is quite different from the original vision for the piece. But it starts with that, and then it's about gathering the materials. And for me, I guess it's the sculptor in me. I love working with a wide variety of materials. I love coming to know each material's sort of special properties, what you can and can't do with a certain material. There are always surprises on the way, um, and then finding my way through that process. So the charred cedar really surprised me. I thought that I would char it and that I would get this kind of flat black charcoaly look. But because I had used the shake fro and kind of split it on the grain, when I charred it, it became very metallic and reflective. Now, it doesn't show that very well in this picture, because in this picture I'm actually charring bark, which really did sort of become charcoaly. But and I didn't wind up really using the barky pieces for that Phoenix from the Flame piece. But the other pieces that I, that were split on the grain, they got kind of iridescent, and it was such a surprise. And what that meant was that I had to make the piece on a day when it was not at all sunny. I needed very dark skies, because otherwise there would have been a lot of reflection popping off of those shingles. But as it turned out, having those moody skies were so appropriate for that piece, and it all just kind of, if I'm lucky, all of those forces come together. I mean, certain things I can control, right? Like the materials I can control. But it's always there's always an element of guesswork about what is the weather exactly going to be doing on this day when my model and I have, arranged this time to do this. So there are always surprises, I've been very lucky. Usually things work out. And usually there are just fabulous surprises that I could not have anticipated. The clouds are a certain way, or the light is a certain way, or the wind is moving my model's hair a certain way, or all of those. I guess it's sort of a collaboration with the weather and all the other forces at work that I have no control over. And if I'm lucky, it all kind of comes together. But it's sort of like following to get back to your original question, a little bit following a trail of breadcrumbs to get to that final goal, and adapting as you go. Sometimes things don't go the way I think, and I have to adapt and change, but it's all in service to getting that final product, that poetic moment, capturing that poetic moment. And then, when we're out there, the actual shoot goes quickly. I'm only taking pictures for half hour, 35, 40 minutes, maybe an hour if my model is very comfortable and it seems important to keep doing that. But in that time, I'll take hundreds of pictures, but I'm looking for the one or two, just that one or two where everything is just right, just a poetic moment. And usually lucky enough to find one or two of those. And so grateful when it happens. It's just, it's so, it gives me it gives my life great meaning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Your work really it's so personal to you, and yet also very universal, right? Like someone can look at that and not necessarily know the reasons or the story behind why you've created it, but there's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
universal sense with it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm curious, with all of your pieces, do you go in with a personal thing that you're personally processing? Like, I feel like the end result is it feels like it could be universal. But do you
Mm-hmm.
enter it? Is the motivation, is that kind of creative impulse driven by a personal experience?
I think some of the pieces, especially the ones that are the dresses, those really come from from being inspired by a material that I've happened upon in nature, that I've stumbled upon, and it's like, oh my, that's gorgeous, like a lace skirt. I happen to be driving by this abandoned lot in Silverdale, Washington, and where the mall is, and the Queen Anne's lace was growing 6-7 feet tall there. Normally, you see it along the side of the road, and it's 2 or 3 feet tall. But it was just stunning. And I drove away from that lot, and all I could think of was the Queen Anne's lace. And I thought, I have to do something with this. And I thought it's lace. It's a skirt. It's the makings of a skirt, and the next day I drove back to that lot and harvested the material and had buckets in my car and buckets of water and brought it home, and I worked on it over the course of a couple days. And then that's actually me modeling that piece. And my husband and I went out to the field after I got off work at my library job and did this. And so back to your original question. Some of these are about noticing material that I am become obsessed with, and I think is just so beautiful and could transform into something that someone could wear and could appear to be part of the landscape. Other of the pieces, for example, grass cocoon and extensions. We talked about grass cocoon already, but extensions was the product of my time in a field, as my friend Sally mentioned, the Chinese gardens here in Port Townsend. Um, I had been just spending a lot of time there with my dogs, and I found this little hill, this little knoll that was westerly facing, and it got this beautiful evening light. And I was just deeply in love with my experience in this place. And I thought, how do I describe it? How do I describe this connection that I feel to this place? What can I do? And I asked that question. I went looking for the inspiration. I went looking for the idea. And because I've always had very long hair my whole life, um, braiding is part of my life. My mother braided my hair when I was little. I braided my daughter's hair when she was little. So braiding is just kind of part of my language, I guess. And the idea for this braid came to me at that site of the knoll. So my model is sitting on the top of this little hill, and it was just a gift. It was just a gift. And I came home. I called Nicole, same model from the piece Grass Cocoon, and told her about the idea. And a short time later, we went out and made it. And I just feel so grateful that I'm the one who got to make that piece. I think, the way people talk about ideas, if you don't seize it, if you don't just take that idea and do something with it, it might fly off and land on someone else, and someone else will make it, someone else will make that short story or that play or that sculpture. I'm glad that I got to hold on to that idea, and I'm glad that I got to make it, because it was just profoundly special, and it still is. And I sell prints a little bit. It's not a big business, but usually it's that one. Usually that's the one people want to own. It was just such a special day.
Mm.
So grateful.
What do you think the role of the artist is in our society?
Hmm. Wow, that's a beautiful question. I think that I think that first of all, I think that anyone could be an artist. I don't think I'm special. I don't, however, it takes a commitment, right? It takes a commitment. You have to show up. It's a practice. So when you're engaged in that practice and you develop a set of tools that you have some, you develop a set of some kind of expertise with those materials, and you develop a vocabulary with which to express the ideas and the inspiration and your inner world, your things from your imagination and your inner world. So I think of it sort of like a cauldron, where it's like in that cauldron is, my personal history, everything that's happened to me in my life, my imagination, and then all the elements that are swirling around out there in the world, the news, the everything that's happening now. And I think it's like this kind of concoction, and that everybody's cauldron is unique, and we all have our own kind of material that might like to come out of us. And I think it's about making that commitment to showing up and cultivating and working and developing a vocabulary. And if you do that, you might be able to give voice to something that is important to the world, something that might move or resonate with other people. There's that actor, Ethan Hawke, and there's a little video about him talking about art. I really encourage you to go look for it. It's really wonderful. And he says, not everybody needs. We're busy. We don't need poetry. We don't need art. But when you get your heart broken, or when you lose a child, or the opposite, when you fall in love, and it brings you to your knees, and you want help understanding those feelings, then you go to art. That's the artist's job. And then it's not superfluous to the human experience. It's essential. It's necessary. And I think that art is necessary. I mean, what would the world be without it? What would the world be without music? I think, having watched my kids grow up, of course, and they and their friends, when they became teens, suddenly music became very important. And I remember that from my own life as a teen. Music became so important. And I thought, this is an art form that they can connect to, that is expressing things that they need to have expressed. They need to connect with something that's beyond our cognition, something deeper than that. And that's what art does. And I really, for me, it is a sacred part of my life. And I think it's vital. I think it's vital to our survival, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully expressed. Thank you, Jeanne. Oh my goodness.
Thank
Wow.
you.
So I would love to invite everyone to, view the entire gallery page to see the pieces. And then there's also a way we've included the link there. And also you can learn more about Jeanne and the prints that Jeanne mentioned on her website as well. So you can check out that link to see all the pieces. And, they are like a meditation gift in themselves, we can go for a hike, we can go into nature to connect in that way. And then when there is an artist who has done that work of working with the realm and bringing that expression and that communication through, looking at pieces like yours, Jeanne, they give that connection, right? They help us to rewild. Seeing those pictures, it helps to rewild us. So I want to thank you so much for the beautiful work that you do and for sharing with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's been lovely. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And there's lots of comments. I want to look through that as well. And just thank you for being part of this. And, everyone who's drawn to this work, I think that speaks to something that is growing inside of you, your own intimate relationship with the natural world and your own yourself, your naturalness. And so I really honor you in your journey. And I'm so honored to be on this journey with you. All right. Thank you so much, Jeanne. I'm sending you all so much love.
Thank you.